Floored and fired up to have Finn Taylor with me, CEO of Volleyball World. I'm Bryan Fenley. This is the On to Something podcast. And what I know about Finn and what we're going to find out in this conversation is not only what he's doing in the sport, but why he's such a congenial personality, why he's an endearing presence in the industry. And we're going to get into all of that as well, learn the human side. First of all, Finn, we met a couple of weeks ago, and I am so stoked. I listened to you talk on the panel in the convention center here in Tampa, where we had obviously the NCAAs going on, but really excited to talk to you, and thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure, Brian. Good to be with you today.
When I listened to you talk on one of those panels at the NCAAs, one of the things I picked up from you, Finn, is you're quick-witted. You have a great sense of humor. You're very approachable. And in a position like you, where you're overseeing a company like Volleyball World that is growing immensely, how have you noticed that those attributes have been very beneficial to you and the exposure of the company and growing people and getting them on board?
That's a good question. I guess for me, I'm trying to be just a little bit straightforward, I guess, right? Maybe one of my faults is I'm sometimes a bit too honest, but I think, when we're trying to look at a problem or a challenge, I should say, and look for something to solve, we're trying to break it down to the core fundamentals, right? And if we can get those sort of situations correct and online, then we have a much easier job moving forward. So for us, we identified that just getting people to watch volleyball, a lot of it was about access and about improving the ease of watching volleyball. So, that's something we solved. But then we're like, well, how do we get them to stay watching? It's like we have to make it interesting or attractive or easy. And so we just try and tick those boxes as we go. And I've got a team that's got, immense volleyball experience and then no volleyball experience, but broadcast experience or live entertainment experience. And so we're just trying to bring attributes from around the world and other industries to be able to serve the sport as well as we can.
When you see the best play this sport and those attributes, what about that, as you watch, say, as a fan, makes you most awestruck?
Well, look, I think that the thing about volleyball is it's an incredibly spectacular sport that's not sold as incredibly spectacular. I think, the gem of the biggest sports leagues in the world is that they're able to really do a great job of accentuating the extraordinary. And in some cases, making the ordinary seem extraordinary. Whereas volleyball doesn't seem to make much of people jumping 11 and a half, 12 feet in the air, or maybe not as much as that they should. And I think that, it is an incredibly spectacular sport. In many ways, the women's game is better than the men's, but I will say, for the purpose of being political, they're both spectacular in their own way. They are two very different games. The men's game is incredibly powerful. And I think what I've seen all around the world is when people come and see men's volleyball live, they cannot understand how fast the ball is moving. And I think also what we saw last year in the US is when we bring the superstars, the female superstars from Turkey and China and Japan, the level of skill and strength that these women have is just next level. And the women's college game is phenomenal in the US, and these international teams are, quite rightly, they're older and more mature, but the athleticism is just phenomenal. And this is something we're trying to get out, because it's one of those things that I think volleyball needs to do a better job of, is really, elevating these feats, because they're pretty special.
That they are. And how do you feel like you can do that?
Well, I think, we're not trying to invent the wheel, right? We have superstars in this sport that need to be put on a pedestal and need to be representatives of the sport in the best form. And this is something that we're very focused. We have a global platform. So we have a blessing and a curse in some ways, because we have very varied audiences around the world, whether it's the population in the Philippines or Thailand versus Texas or California. So we have to be able to create messaging and imagery and events that cater to all of those audiences. And I think for us, focus is one thing, right? There's not really been that focus put into that side of the sport previously. I make the point all the time that in many years past, as long as you had 6 people on one side and 6 people on the other, the job was done. You had a game of volleyball. Well, we're not actually trying to sell a game of volleyball. We're trying to build an entertaining 2 hours for a spectator. So that's kind of how we're looking at it.
You are really good at, obviously, and seeing what you've done at Volleyball World, growing the sport, in being impressively talented at marketing it. And you are, in a sense, you have to be a good seller of the sport, in that you're going into people and places and you're talking about where the sport is going and being behind it and seeing just new fans pick up the sport. As somebody who's on the front lines and exposed to a lot of maybe non traditional volleyball fans, when you get into that seller mindset, what do you find in those situations makes it to where you are picking up new followers of the sport and you're able to connect with a completely new demographic and set of people?
Look, I think the sport itself is its best sales tool. When we get people in an arena watching the matches and providing them a good, entertaining product, right? We have the fan engagement activities, we have the big screen, we have the throwaways during the timeouts. I mean, this all matters. And if we can keep a fan's attention for 2 hours, then they're going to come back. It's a no-brainer. And I talked a lot about the changes we're making to the game to speed it up, to reduce that downtime between points and sets and what have you, because we need to keep the attention. And we need to, once we grab that attention through the first serve or the first block or whatever, we need to be able to keep that fan engaged, because it's a rush, and people like to feel like that, and they'll keep coming back. I think really the sport is its best sales tool. And so as much as we can, we keep trying to be able to, bring fans into the matches and invest in the marketing and invest in the promotion. What we're seeing over the last couple of years on the international game in particular is people will come to good volleyball matches. Whereas in the past, people would just come to the volleyball match of their team. And so this is a great transition, incredibly positive for us, because I can be in Texas in summer, and I can have a sellout with Turkey versus China or Brazil versus Turkey, and this wouldn't have happened a few years ago. But people now know that you can sit down and appreciate an amazing volleyball match no matter who's on either side of the court.
In watching the growth of the sport, and obviously you played a pivotal role in that, in the evolution of the sport, how much do you, with all of what you're doing as far as the input and delegation and working with your team and being forthright with them about what you're looking for as far as decisions to grow the sport, but how much, Finn, has it been in this process with you being with Volleyball World, where you really tapped into being a good listener, in hearing other people's perspective, in the value of that, and how that's allowed you to be at your best?
Well, I would say, honestly, Brian, that's most of it. I would say I've had a very small part in the growth and the popularity of the sport. What I've tried to do with the team is be able to essentially surf that growth and be able to help push it along. I will say that we have an amazing partner in the International Volleyball Federation, the FIVB, of all international sporting federations, who are generally regarded as traditional and conservative. The FIVB has been incredibly progressive. They've been willing to try things, willing to test things, and we've really been able to embrace that willingness by them to be able to push the envelope in terms of making the product more accessible and fan friendly and fun. And so I've been lucky to be able to have good partners like that, and really benefited from that.
When you're pushing the product and trying new things, and Finn Taylor is with me, I'm Bryan Fenley, he's the CEO of Volleyball World. When do you think, intuition wise, that something new, taking a risk, trying something different is worth it in making that decision whether you do it or not?
I think everything's in context, right? We will take risks if it's an asymmetrical benefit to the loss, right? So look, the Nebraska football stadium match is a great example, right? Nebraska is obviously an incredibly successful team, and those guys looked at the opportunity and said, well, what's the worst that can happen? And clearly no one was never going to turn up. They were always going to get a good crowd. And so I think when we're looking at other opportunities or testing things, we're looking at it in a similar lens, in that what does it lead to? How can we build off this? If it's a success, or if it's a break even, or if it's a failure, what does that mean for us? I mean, I think we're lucky. We're not really forced into making uncalculated risks, so we kind of have a little bit of an advantage in that sense. But we do want to be able to push the envelope, and we do need to keep moving forward. So, there are things that we'll try, that we will test in underage events or things like that maybe aren't as successful as we'd want them to be. But again, we're lucky that we have partners that are willing to allow us that latitude.
How do you measure success, Finn?
Look, we're a commercially based company, so we obviously have some pretty tough financial metrics to measure, but we do very much measure NPS, both from a live fan experience and from a broadcast fan experience. Whether it's on volleyball TV or whether it's through our broadcasters around the world, we're very conscious of being able to understand what the fan is experiencing, and at the same time, we do a lot of questioning of the players and the teams to understand their appreciation of what's happening as well. So, we're very, very constantly receiving feedback and constantly trying to measure where we are in the scheme of things.
When it comes to the broadcasting component of what you do, where do you feel most drawn in when there are storytelling components that are shared during a telecast?
I guess what we're trying to do with, say, volleyball TV, or whenever we're producing any broadcast, is be able to show the sport in its best light, but also the athletes in their individualness. Now, volleyball by its nature is possibly the ultimate team sport. You can't win a match by yourself. And so it's very much about having the fan understand what happened and bringing context to it. Again, in a sport that's relied a lot in the recent years on streaming feeds in the most brutal sense, often that will turn on 1 minute before the game and turn off 1 minute after the game. But the only fan that will really appreciate it is the hardcore fan. What we're trying to do is allow the casual fan to gain context to the match, and then have an appreciation of why this match matters or why this set matters. Because you really need to be able to add that level of comprehension to really appreciate it. And then the other side of it is when we've developed all of this new technology to be able to help the officiating. Yes, part of it is to help the officiating, but most of it is actually to provide the fans clarity on in-out calls and floor touches and things like that are so quick in a sport like volleyball that you can often be wondering what happened. Was that really in? Was it out? I couldn't see it. And so now we actually have the ability to tell the full story and be able to have the fan fully comprehend what's going on throughout the entire match.
To tell you, or to glean about your own full story, what would I learn about you and how you've become what you've become today, based upon, say, if I knew you, Finn, when you were a child, in your upbringing, and how much would that indicate to me now where you would be and what you'd be doing?
Well, that's a really, really hard question to answer. honestly, I'm not sure how I would answer that. I can tell you that part of my, well, most of my career has been about trying to provide audiences with entertainment. I've spent 20 odd years in live entertainment before coming to sport. So um, it's about, you know, trying to join those dots of having somebody captivated for a couple of hours, and what keeps them there and what draws them in the first place. And in the end, it all is very generic answers, Brian, but it all comes back to storytelling and how you can grab their imagination and hold on to it. Whether that's live entertainment or whether that's sport, it's very, very similar. The basics are almost identical, but the medium changes. And so you just need to adapt to that. I think that yeah, I think that's probably it. My parents were very big on taking me to live entertainment as a child, so it sort of carried through.
What was the first thing they took you to?
Probably a classical orchestra or something like that. So yeah, that wasn't so much fun as a 7 or 8 year old, but certainly the theatre and concerts and things like that was a big part of my childhood.
Well, since then, you've had a full fledged experience in the entertainment world, obviously coming from live events and now working in sport. And as we wrap up this conversation, Finn, I got to say, and listening to you talk, you're quite the entertainer yourself. You've got that great personality that makes you so good at what you do, makes you so approachable, as mentioned. And you've got really good things going at Volleyball World. And it's been an honor to canvas you and all that you are doing. Finn Taylor, I'm Bryan Fenley, a broadcaster of volleyball for ESPN. Thanks so much, Finn, for doing this. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Brian.